Is this yours, Fred?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You switched us around to be on the side of the car.
Well, no, I went where the...
That's perfect.
That's okay.
Where
Love
do
it.
you...
I'll be here, you can be in the middle.
Okay.
That way I'm in the
Oh,
dark.
it's not, you know, there's a very famous thing that Jinnah, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, said to, it was, I guess, Nehru, which was something about a rose between two thorns. He was standing, I think, in between. There were two women on either side. So this is a rose between two thorns.
Yes, it is, I'm
You
afraid.
sure you want me to...
Yes.
We recite in the name of the red rose.
Red rose, yeah.
It's my pleasure to introduce our plenary speakers. Two respondents who have agreed to take on the difficult job of drawing this conference to a close. I ask you to take your seats if you can, please. When the steering committee came together last June to imagine the shape of this conference, we decided to have two plenary respondents who could bring different disciplinary backgrounds to bear in leading a final discussion. I was very grateful, therefore, that Farhat Muazzam and Fred Denny agreed to serve in this capacity. They'll each speak for about 10-15 minutes, and then we'll open up to a larger discussion of the questions and points that they raise. Farhat Muazzam needs no introduction, and yet I will anyway. She is professor and chair of the Center of Biomedical Ethics and Culture at the Sindh Institute of Urology in Karachi, Pakistan. A pediatric surgeon who worked at the University of Florida for many years, she also holds an MA in bioethics and a PhD in religious studies from the University of Virginia. She is the author of many important articles in both clinical and bioethical topics, and her book is coming out from Indiana University Press this summer. Great. And it's, I'm sorry, the title?
It's essentially, it's bioethics in a Muslim society, and it's looking at life kidney donation.
But you have this great title, though, right?
Yeah, I know. Sands of the Ocean. Taken from Joe, but I have a feeling the editor felt that would go over the heads of many people. So.
Oh, I like it.
So it's going to be a very functioning title.
She has served as a consultant on numerous national and international organizations. And this week, we're also fortunate to have her here at Penn State as the Institute for the Arts and Humanities Distinguished Visiting Scholar. Please welcome Farhat Muazzam.
Thank you very much. I would like to, of course, first thank Jonathan Brokaw. I don't know if I should really thank you, but anyway, I will, for getting me involved in this through an email that I received in Karachi about this. But I'm really delighted to be here. And it's not an easy task to organize something like this. So congratulations. I would also like to thank the hardy people who are sitting still in this audience. And I wonder how many of you are half brain dead, higher brain dead, or fully brain dead, because I am about halfway there already. I think the importance, I'll just make some very general comments. The importance of this conference, in my mind, this is a significant conference. And I say this having gone to conferences both in Pakistan, in the Middle East, and in the United States. But there has always been a kind of a fragmentation, and I think for Jonathan to have managed to get together people who are historians, sociologists, scholars of Islam, philosophers and physicians in one room, this is rather unique, particularly when the topic is around Islam. I would also like to thank Jonathan for the title he chose, which is Islam and Bioethics. And it's not Islamic bioethics, nor is it bioethics in the Islamic world, which is often the kind of topics that the titles that you come across. I've always had difficulty in this compartmentalization of the Muslim world, the developing world, the developed world. I am supposed to be in a developing world, but I can tell you we're a heck of a lot more developed than some of the people in this part of the world in a lot of important areas. To give you, and if I'll tell you just a story which I think you may find amusing. The IOMS had, as I have mentioned already in February, they held a conference. It was an international conference. The title of that was Religious and Secular Perspectives on Genetic Engineering and Reproductive Technology. They emailed me and asked me to come and present a paper and said, could you please send us a title? And could you please tell us how you would like to be designated? Would you like to be designated as a secular scholar or as a Muslim scholar?
Wow.
So I wrote back to them, told them that the title of my talk would be Genetic Engineering and Social Justice, the Confluence of Religious and Secular Concerns. So I got an email back that said, that's great, and we're looking forwards to hearing your talk, and we have designated you as a secular scholar. So I said, okay, and a week later came another email saying, we just wanted to inform you that we have redesignated you as a Muslim scholar. Now, I started my talk in Cairo, at the Cairo meeting with this, and frankly, what I said was that I was delighted that I had created this confusion, because it was time that we got out of these narrow little boxes and started to communicate, which we cannot do if we're going to designate people as such. Anyway, I think the biggest contribution of this conference, so anyway, it's Islam and bioethics. Just a few comments based on my observation of what we've been doing in the last 2 days. And I think the biggest benefit of this conference and the importance that I see it is the issue of the diversity that has come up again and again that exists within Muslims. Muslims are human beings like anybody else, and even though they are Muslims and they follow the 5 pillars of Islam, but there is a diversity of Muslim experiences, how Muslims live their lives. And this is something I call the living Islam. And this is what I had studied when I was putting my research together for the dissertation. And this has come out in spades in the last 2 days, because living Islam is influenced by a lot of things. It's influenced by the indigenous cultural norms. It's also influenced by the shared history of a people who geographically live together. It also depends on how Islam was introduced into the country. Islam could have been introduced, it started in the Saudi Peninsula. It came to Pakistan in a very different way. It went to Indonesia in a very different way. And so it evolved differently, which is not to say that Islam is not very important in all these countries, but its experiential part of Muslim lives varies. And of course, we mustn't forget that the socioeconomic realities among the countries in which Muslims live vary tremendously. And let us not forget also that politics comes in too. So how Islam is interpreted or lived in Pakistan is very different from the way that happens in Saudi Arabia, for that matter, or in Kuwait. And all these things, in a way, therefore, also, and as a physician, they also affect the patient-physician family relationships. Another thing, and this is something maybe for the future, Fred, is there is a continuing a concept that I see when I go to meetings in which Islam continues to be kind of connected to the Arabic-speaking people. And somehow the legitimacy comes from that part of the world. But just to let you know, and I'm sure most of you know that, the Muslims who speak Arabic or who live in primarily countries in the Middle East are a tiny minority now of Muslims around the world. Pakistan has 160 million Muslims. I mean, it could encompass all of Middle East. Indonesia has more than 200 million Muslims. So this is an issue which I think needs to be looked at. In the conference here, for example, I was noticing, and this is not of any fault of Jonathan's, but it's just geographically, I mean, traveling, etc., is very difficult. But on a conference that was on Islam and bioethics, there were really only two speakers who came from outside, quote, the Arab-speaking world. One was from Iran, and the other person is me. And then I apologize. I think I spoke too much trying to make up for this.
Abu Fadl Mohsen Ibrahim from South Africa.
Yes. Yes, thank you for reminding me. Yeah. So I think this is an issue that maybe for the future, and part of it may be because of the geography, it's tough for people to come over here. But I think hopefully this group will go away recognizing that when we talk of Islam and Muslims, there's a whole lot of Muslims, and now you see the number of Muslims in North America. The issues, the problems that I see that also I noticed in the papers, etc., we speak a great deal about hadith and we speak a great deal about what's in the Quran, and all that is important. But I do not believe that there has been sufficient attention and research in the area of what I call living Islam. So actually it was a pleasure to listen to some of the papers here that did look at the living experience in Tanzania, for example, or Egypt. And I think that's important. The other issue that I think is extremely important and which is missing is there's a lack of dialogue and connections both between the countries that are Muslim countries and that have a majority population of Muslims, and a lack of connection and bridges between those countries and North America. And I think, again, Jonathan needs to be congratulated that this is a first step, and maybe this is the first chink so that we can start, because I think this kind of network is extremely important. Just a few words on the second part of it, which is bioethics. I have very strong views on, by bioethics, I mean contemporary bioethics, and I'm a surgeon. I'm supposed to have strong views. But contemporary bioethics, as it has developed, and my supervisor was Jim Childress was the person who actually, he and Beecham wrote the Bible when they wrote the book, Principles of Biomedical Ethics. Now, one of the things which again came up also, which since I've been back in Pakistan is problematic, which is that the language of bioethics is essentially English. Now, if you look at the large number of countries where Muslims live, it's a very elite small percentage that speaks English. If you take Pakistan, for example, it's a prime example. Now, what is happening in bioethics for Muslims is that we, the elites, we give lectures in which we talk of the 4 principles of bioethics, and this is in English in Pakistan. And then when we switch to discussions, we switch into Urdu automatically. And the problem that we see then is we do not have the words autonomy, which is the centerpiece of contemporary bioethics, and it was raised again in some of the papers over here, it's a problematic concept. It's a concept that's a new concept, and it's a concept that is historically and socially driven by Anglo-European philosophical thought. So as a result, in Urdu, when I communicate with my patients, who should be the focus of bioethics, I cannot talk to them of autonomy. The word which is khud mukhtar in Urdu is a word that you would only use for God. Only God is khud mukhtar. And so in our conversation with our patients, bioethics, at least from the Pakistani point of view, loses its relevance with its centrality on autonomy. And in this, I think we, the Muslims, are responsible, because what we are doing is, just as we transplanted science from the West, and that's a bad term, but I'm going to use it. We transplanted this was in the middle of the last century, we transplanted science from the West into Pakistan. We are now transplanting bioethics into Pakistan. But science and bioethics, or ethics or morality, are two very, very different things. I mean, when I operate on a child in the United States, the anatomy is the same if I operated on a child in Pakistan. But as soon as I step out of the operating room, I'm in a different world. And I do not think that we, the Muslims, have really given this sufficient thought. Now, I think that contemporary bioethics has done a great deal of good. I think it has made us as physicians sit up and take notice of what we're doing and how we treat our patients. But I find contemporary bioethics as being without a soul. And one of the things that we can do, those of us who are Muslims, but also those who study Islam and may not be Muslims, is to pull out some of the things, the new things, that are there in our tradition, which I think would enrich the contemporary discourse on bioethics. I think we should stop, and this is my personal opinion, you can disagree with that, we should stop trying to go back and saying, well, these 4 principles are there in the Quran, or these 4 principles can be drawn out of the Hadith. I think we have a lot more to offer. Islam, and in that, by the way, I would include all the monotheistic religions particularly, have a great element of virtue ethics, in which it's the character of the actor that is extremely important. Contemporary bioethics looks at the act, so that if you take a informed consent, you have to make sure that you give all the information to the patient and make sure that he or she understands. But contemporary bioethics does not say anything about the character and the virtue of the person who's taking the informed consent. And so I think the two, both of them are important. In the 350-page book that Jim Childress and Beecham have written on the principles of biomedical ethics, and by the way, I've discussed this with Jim, he knows how I feel about it. Virtue ethics is something like about 4 pages. Now, most of us who are in Muslim countries are working in countries that are the population we serve are extremely poor people. These are people, the literacy rate is not very high. And we do not have the legal systems in place where if a patient, even if a patient did know his or her rights and that they were being violated, they have no access to doing anything about it. And that makes the virtuous physician, very old-fashioned notion, but makes the virtuous physician even more important than anywhere else. And I think these are the issues we can bring up that will enrich the discourse on contemporary bioethics. And this means we have to do our homework. We have to look at our own issues, look at what I call living Islam. And I think there's a great deal, we've learned a great deal from contemporary bioethics, and I think we have a great deal to offer to it also. So I think I'll stop there. These were just some very general views based on my having worked in the States for 17 years and about the same number of years in Pakistan, in two very, very same world, but two very different universes. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Fred Denny. Fred is one of the movers and shakers in Islamic studies and in the study of religion in the United States. He is Emeritus Professor of Religious Studies at the University of Colorado and board member of the American Academy of Religion, among many other positions and honors that he holds. The author of numerous books and articles, including two important introductions to Islam, Dr. Denny's work covers a wide swath in the field. Most recently, he co-edited an important collection on environmental ethics, and he edits a long-standing series in comparative religion from the University of South Carolina Press. I'm very pleased to introduce Fred Denny.
Thank you so much, John, and I'm very grateful to be here and to make new friends and to learn so much. That's the big thing. My remarks will be brief, inshallah. I can't imagine summarizing what has enriched and stimulated us all over the past 2 days. And if I did try, then those of you who did not fall asleep would be crowding the exit. If Razi or Avicenna were assigned my task, then I would sit amongst this audience until al-yawm al-akhirah, or at least until my 5 p.m. flight to Denver tomorrow. General observations. The conference program was rich and varied, with good overall balance among the medical, ethical, caregiving, scientific, historical, socio-cultural, pedagogical, and religio-legal dimensions of the general topic. I hope I've touched upon most of them, at least, by mentioning them. As a longtime student of Islam and Muslim life, living Islam, but merely a pea-green freshman in bioethics, I learned much from the papers and questions and discussions, and I plan to pursue further knowledge and understanding of this field of bioethics in my ongoing work, which is at present heavily invested in Islam, human rights, and ecology. I think our conference topic is an excellent, excuse me, I just hit the wrong button. I'll be right back. Yeah, I always need help with these things. Okay. I think that our conference topic is an excellent fit with the discourses of environmental ethics, ecology, and human rights. One of my principal global regions of research is Southeast Asia, particularly Islamic institutions of higher education in Malaysia and Java, where I've been a visiting professor on a couple of occasions and visited at other times for field research. I was surprised and somewhat troubled by Dr. Shanawani's and Mr. Khalil's search results for Islam and bioethics relating to Southeast Asia, and we've chatted about this briefly, Hassan and I have, and I plan to share their paper if I may be permitted to do so.
I guess I
can't say no, it's public forum.
Or I can give a report. I want to share it with colleagues. And
Disclosure, I did say yes already when you asked.
yes, I want to share it with colleagues in Petaling Jaya, where the University of Malaya is, and also the International Islamic University, where I've been a visiting professor, and also in Yogyakarta and Surabaya and Jakarta in Indonesia, where I've done a lot of work over the last 25 years. Most recently in looking at human rights as a possible degree program at one of those universities. And I'm going to be exploring that next year, inshallah. Wither Islam and bioethics. Wither, W-H-I-T-H-E-R. Islam is not withering, it's going someplace. I agree with expressions of concern about much of bioethical discourse with respect to Islam and Muslims following dominant Western trends more than striking out in independent, original, and creative, constructive ways. It's not to say that what's being done is not worth something. It's worth a great deal. It's tremendous, but it is following, as a couple of people at least have mentioned during the last 2 days. The latter, the creative, constructive ways, could reflect Islamic norms, values, and practices, as well as provide potentially productive areas, ideas, and practices for other populations as well, perhaps particularly Jewish and Christian populations, where there are such significant cognate, ethical, doctrinal, spiritual, and psychological priorities and practices, not to mention our common humanity in the operating room, as you said so well. Interreligious dialogue, interreligious trialogue, and beyond, as valuable as they are for community and peace building in today's world, could move in new constructive directions if applied to the practical bioethical concerns of healing and counseling. Sorry, I did it again. I don't know what's gone wrong with this, but anyway, I'll get it back.
It's been a long day.
It's been a long day.
Your
Yeah, right.
computer's tired.
My computer's tired, right? I forgot my mantra. But anyway, I've got it here. Okay. The papers by Doctors Shabir Alibhai, Iqbal Jaffer, and Michael Gordon on Muslim and Jewish bioethical principles and practices are, to me, a very inspiring exercise that could help many others plot productive courses at local levels and beyond, in congregations, clinics, hospitals, military settings in today's world, educational institutions, and so forth. I am interested in the development of mediating discourses in religion and human rights, mediating discourses, so that diverse peoples of religious conviction may not be threatened with having to base their convictions about rights exclusively on the dominantly secular and non-religious bases that have dominated Western rights discourses since the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948 and its important subsequent appendices, which are continuing. I am personally very supportive of the 1949 Declaration as far as it goes, but its deliberate decision not to base human rights on religion in any manner continues to be a difficult issue for many religious people across the world, including Muslims. Not for all, but many do not go for what the Western specialists often call the pragmatic and minimalist definitions of human rights. It's not only not comfortable, it's not acceptable to many people. I'm not going to get into a long discourse on this, but I just wanted to raise it. In 1998, in celebration of the 50th anniversary of the UN Declaration, a conference at McGill University in Canada set forth a Universal Declaration of Human Rights for the world's religions. The draft declaration has sparked considerable discussion and debate, but it does have the virtue of being quite open and non-sectarian. I had two graduate seminars at the University of Colorado before I retired, and the students pretty much ripped it apart, which I thought was interesting. They cared enough to go after it, and many of them thought it's a good direction, but it's not there yet. Well, we're not there yet in many ways either. I'm not proposing the drafting of a universal declaration concerning Islam and bioethics or religion and bioethics by any means. But the ongoing discussions and debates concerning human rights declarations, including some from the Muslim world, such as the Cairo Declaration of 1990, highly controversial in even some Islamic circles, not to mention in other parts of the world, could be quite relevant to some of the topics and issues that we have addressed during this conference. And this leads me to an observation about religion and bioethics, not just Islam and bioethics, but religion and bioethics, that is informed by the words of a prominent contemporary Muslim philosopher, scientist, and human rights activist, Abdul Karim Soroush of Iran. Dr. Soroush writes, and I quote, "The first issue concerning human rights is that it is not a solely legal fiqhi," he means, intra-religious argument, not a solely legal intra-religious argument. Discussion, quoting, "Discussion of human rights belongs to the domain of philosophical theology and philosophy in general. Furthermore, it is an extra-religious area of discourse." Extra-religious, my emphasis. Like other debates on matters that are prior to, yet influential in religious understanding and acceptance, such as the objectivity of ethical values, the problem of free choice, the existence of God, and the election of prophets, human rights lies outside the domain of religion. A religion that is oblivious to human rights, including the need of humanity for freedom and justice, is not tenable in the modern world. In other words, religion needs to be right not only logically, but also ethically. End of quote from Abdul Karim Soroush. I think that Soroush's words apply to our discourse over the past 2 days as well. Of course, those words of his may be understood in various ways, which I am sure the author prefers for at least Socratic reasons. Get a dialogue going, a good discussion. But just as medical texts by Muslim thinker practitioners such as Rhazes, that is the physician Razi, and Avicenna were still consulted in Latin translation, I think, by European physicians down to at least the 17th century, so also could bold and visionary Islam and bioethics discourses and practices be of the greatest benefit today. I think that as in the nearly 3-century long era, I think it's 3 centuries almost, of Al-Kindi, Razi, Avicenna, Maimonides, the great Jewish philosopher and physician, and Ibn Rushd of Airways, and Islam and bioethics venture could cooperate with parallel initiatives throughout today's world. The final chapter of Progressive Muslims, Omid Safi's remarkable edited collection of original essays by a variety of Muslim scholars, published in 2003 by One World in Oxford, UK. And the title of the final chapter is "What is the Victory of Islam Towards a Different Understanding of the Ummah and Political Success in the Contemporary World?" And it's by Malaysian political scientist, human rights activist, and columnist Farish A. Noor. His chapter puts forth a, quote, Islam without borders, Islam bila hudud, by which Noor means a truly universal Islam with Muslims living and engaged in the whole world in all its diversity and need. Noor contrasts this with the traditional religio-political notion of a separate Darul Islam, the household of submission, sharply demarcated from the rest of the human family, which is still sometimes signified in some circles as the Dar al-Harb, the household of warfare, to be ultimately subdued and converted. Noor writes, we need to forge a new chain of equivalences that equates universal concerns with Muslim concerns and universal problems with Muslim problems. The Muslim heart cannot bleed only when it sees Muslim tears. If we are not moved by the plight and suffering of others, if we cannot feel the pain and anxieties of others, if we cannot share the joy and aspirations of others, then we cannot claim the same rights and entitlements for ourselves. Our concerns for justice, equity, rights, and freedom need to be articulated in a borderless world where our audience is not only ourselves, but the world as a whole, both now and in the future. And I say amen, and thank you.
Thank you both very much. We now have about a half hour to discuss any aspect of this that you would like. And in particular, may I make a request on behalf of the steering committee? We would be very interested in particular suggestions for further work, including the publication of what we've done here so far. Is there any?
Okay, thank you for the talks. Actually, I have a question for Dr. Sorry, I forgot her name. Here you, John.
Me?
Dr. Mazen?
Muazzam.
Yeah, can I ask you a question about what you mentioned that you chat or you talk together in Pakistan in Urdu language? I was in Pakistan in 2003 and I presented 2 talks there, and I noticed you have an excellent resources in medical and healthcare field at Aga Khan University. And actually, I don't know if you know that in Pakistan they publish six journals, 6 medical journals, and we may publish something in those journals in the future about the conferences here. Now my question is like, do people speak in English? But since you have the resources in English, the journals are English, the books are in medical, all of them in English. Do they talk? Do you speak like with the students in English language or in Urdu? Thanks.
You're talking of the Aga Khan University. I have worked at the Aga Khan University. I was chairman of the Department of Surgery at the Aga Khan University for 10 years. And for 5 years, I was the associate dean of postgraduate education in that institution. I knew it well. It's a very good institution, but the Aga Khan University in a lot of ways is like an island. So in Aga Khan University, when I first joined there, it used to surprise me when I would call the hospital, somebody would pick up the phone and say, "Good morning, can I be of help?" And I would say, "Why are you saying good morning? Salam karo. Tum yahan Pakistan mein baithe hue ho." Saying essentially, so this is not to run AKU down, it's doing a lot of good work. The teaching and the lectures throughout Pakistan, they are in English. For example, in medical school, you use English. But part of the problem is because we don't have textbooks in any other language. So in all these specialties, the textbooks are in English. The difficulty that occurs, and I'm coming from the healthcare professional point of view, is we do that in English, but when we go into our clinics, now in AKU you would find a certain percentage of patients who would speak in English and another percentage who would come in and who would feel they had to speak in English because this was an English kind of a place. But the majority of our patients speak in Urdu. And therefore, the idea of having bioethics over there, contemporary bioethics started in the United States, for example, in the late 60s and 70s, because of a ground movement. There were a lot of things going on. The Vietnam War was coming to an end. Feminist movements were up. The public was upset about what was happening in healthcare professions. And if you know the history, bioethics in this country did not start with physicians. It was a reaction against physicians. I'm willing to take a bet, however, in the globalization of bioethics to that part of the world, it's we, the English-speaking physicians, who are taking it forwards. We have had no input from what our public expects from us. Does our public expect autonomy? Does our public there expect a contractual basis of relationship with physicians? And yet that is what we are doing. We were the first people to start a bioethics group. Actually, I chaired it in AKU. And these were the issues that we had started to face. So,
Thank you.
Thank you for the panel. Professor Denny, I was really intrigued by your comments. I wanted to follow up on the ones by Professor Noor and read you a quote and ask what you might think putting these two together, especially on the question of definition, because these are some questions I was asked also. This is a quote about how to define a community, kind of along the lines of Noor. Islam clearly replaced but did not erase the hierarchical tribal structure present in pre-Islamic Arabia. To erase would be an impossible feat. The rise of a new religious tradition is an amalgamation of old and new, a borrowing and a creating. A new tradition that provides no novelty ceases to be anything distinguishable from what it purports to replace. A new tradition that carries with it none of what it replaces, other than being seemingly impossible and ignoring the entire notion of historicity, would provide no resources or possibilities for new adherents to join. Examples can be seen in Christian reconciliation of Judaism with Greek philosophical thought, and other examples. So the question being, if one promotes values such as egalitarian liberal universalism, as Noor inculcates, is it only responsible if one also contributes what one is leaving behind necessarily because of it? And how does that, and it's a big question, I'm sorry, but how does that fit into our debates about when one leaves a community and when one joins one?
Well, it's a very profound question, and one that people have been dealing with forever, including the Muslim peoples of the world. It's quite remarkable, I think, that only Islam of the Abrahamic religions, and Judaism doesn't quite fit here because it wasn't a religion trying to spread its message, but Christianity and Islam have certainly been rivals much of the time. That Islam is the only one that really took hold in large parts of Asia and stayed. And not Nestorian Christianity, but something that really became at home and rooted in these places. I think that says something, and in Southeast Asia too, of course, in island Southeast Asia. I think that says something about the adaptability and the tremendous welcoming attitude of Muslims and Islam. Some of the stories of the spread of Islam through Java, for example, and other parts of the archipelago are very, very moving in terms of the, first, the tendency to bond with people personally through marriage, not just through business, although business is important too, trust, covenants, contracts, and so forth, I think tells us something of the enormous human resources and group resources that Muslim community and society ideas have. Most of what you said right at the beginning of your quote, still there are many tribal structures and functions in places where Muslims live, and not just in the Jazeera, but in other parts of the world as well. You find it very much in Sumatra and other places like that, where I've been in many different areas and found tremendously rich diversity I've found disagreement. I've found hostility. I don't mean toward me personally. I've always been the honored, protected guest, and I'm grateful for that. But in just seeing things that are going on, which we can see in the world today, I think that Noor is speaking of things that could be related to ideals that have been set forth as early as the Quran. And much earlier indeed, because the Quran does not claim to be the first to expound the values of ethical monotheism, but rather to reassert them and to bring them to people who haven't had them before. I'm thinking of a passage in the cow surah, Al-Baqarah. Indeed, we have created an ummatan wasatan, a midmost ummah. I relate that in my loose tafsir to my idea of mediating, of a media, not a media mogul in the modern sense, but a mediating reality that's alive. And when I was in Jogja a little over a year ago, we had a wonderful conference on the ideal which of an Indonesian Islamic university. And what people were doing were brainstorming as to possible new curricular directions for Islamic higher education in Indonesia. For one thing, the Indonesian Islamic universities are losing market share to the secular Indonesian public universities. That's not amusing to people who are trying to push a progressive form of Islamic understanding and learning together with sciences, social and natural and others as well. And so they're saying, what can we do? What are we doing wrong? We're losing our best students, the ones we used to get. They're going to the secular universities. And so they're trying to rethink this and move in a new direction. I made a recommendation, frankly, to establish a human rights degree program in one of those universities, saying that you could not only create careers and make this a homegrown reality in Indonesia that comes out of Indonesian soil, and this is what I meant when I was criticizing the 1948 Declaration a little bit, finding your own way of understanding human rights, then you could be an ummah wasat within the global ummah, because there are different ummahs in the world. There's the prison ummah that I've done research in the United States. There are local ummahs, and I'm not saying that they take the place of the global ummah. But the global ummah, of course, is the great reality, but there are other ummahs, and if you don't have little ummahs, you're probably not going to have a big ummah that means anything more than a generality. Didn't mean to go on for so long, but you really pushed a button, because this is something I love very much. Thank you.
Can I add
Of
something
course,
to
yeah.
that? A little bit along what Fred said. The issue is that Islam, there must be something about Islam that appeals to people. Islam is growing. It's growing fairly rapidly. So that's one thing. So there has to have been, over the years, enough vigor in it and enough material in it for people to want to live as Muslims. The other thing, which I think Dr. Haq mentioned in his talk, something about after the 12th century, things becoming ossified. And this, I think, is a myth. The closure of the gates of ijtihad. There is plenty that is evident that this was something that was just put out. I mean, for Islam, from the 12th century to now, have grown as it has grown because it is responding to the people who call themselves Muslim. So we have to be careful about some of the language. I will not take that up now. I have a problem even with the terms progressive Muslim. I don't know. No, I don't know. Am I a liberal Muslim? Am I a progressive Muslim?
You're secular.
And and that is awful. As far as I'm concerned, it is, if you say you're a secular Muslim, that's an oxymoron. You cannot be. So one has to be careful. I mean, what's a progressive Muslim? Progressive Muslim is somebody who goes along with what, you know, the West is saying. Democracy, we have to have democracy. We have to have human rights. This is not a personal attack.
No. Yeah, a progressive Muslim, though, is a
Yeah.
Muslim who says, you talking to me?
Is progressive? Okay. So,
And I like that.
yeah, what I'd like to see also is progressive Christians, progressive Jews, progressive Buddhists. So, and I've told Jonathan, I mean, things have changed in negative ways, and it's important for Muslims to come up maybe with how they feel. I mean, Muslims have been pushed into a position where we are apologizing all the time. If you say progressive Muslims, does that mean the others are retrogressive? You know, so I'm sorry. I was this was not a personal attack, but this is something that, you know, and I think it bothers a lot of Muslims.
Could I just remind this questioners to identify themselves before they ask their question?
Yeah, Eric Anderson, Philosophy Department, Penn State. Dr. Moazam, I have a quick question for you.
Yeah.
I'm interested in your program to revive virtue ethics. And so here's my problem, or here's my worry. Virtue ethics only gets 4 pages in these textbooks, partly because it's about stable habits of character. It's about, you know, things that have been tried and true for a long time. Bioethics seems to be about novelty, technological novelty, political novelty, these sorts of things. Makes more sense when you tell me, hey, look, in practice, I am looking for a kind of virtue ethics. Well, we need this clinically or something like that. Theoretically, I'm a little bit worried about this because I look at the problem and I see there's a reason why we go to normative theories or to principled theories, and we look for ways to schematize our values and then to weigh in on a particular act or question. So let me direct this back to the question of Islam. Is there a set of virtues or resources in Islam that you think you can revive, bring to virtue ethics that deals with the problem of novelty, specifically with medical technology?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. When I spoke of virtue ethics, it was not a question of either or, because virtue ethics looks at the actor, the agent, and contemporary ethics essentially looks at the process. That's putting it in a very general way. I think both are important. The issue and the reason I think both are important is that virtue ethics, the way contemporary bioethics developed here, and as I said, it's done a lot of good things, it has the infrastructure. It has, for example, as I said, if somebody feels that their rights have been violated, then they can actually access a way and fight that. In a lot of Muslim countries, I think both are needed. And I think the important thing is from Muslim, and I don't know if you're familiar with Izutsu's work. He's a Japanese scholar, and he has written some very interesting material on essentially the ethical concepts, not theories, that you can derive from the Quran itself. So the point I had made earlier is I think we have not done enough of our own homework. For example, a ethics course in Pakistan, and I'm talking of Pakistan right now, should teach people how to take an informed consent, but also should have in that the Muslim concepts, which include, by the way, qist and adl. And that is essentially, you know, it's equity and social justice. And contemporary bioethics has failed, although the 4th principle is justice. If you look at it, it has become focused on tertiary medicine and talks of issues like stem cell, on genetic engineering, on should you take somebody off a ventilator or not. So I think it has focused too much on that area. And a lot of these issues, including, I mean, it was interesting. There was so much talk on abortion in the last 2 days. 40 days, 40 days, 40 days, when does ensoulment take place, and when is it okay for an abortion? We are reflecting the polar in that material. We are reacting to the polarization in this culture on the issue of abortion. Abortion is not a big issue is not the major issue in a lot of Muslim countries. Certainly it isn't in Pakistan. So what I'm saying is it's both these things that are needed, but I think contemporary bioethics has become too mechanical, and it is driven by tertiary kind of medicine. But the world needs adl and qist.
Just a footnote to that, if I may. When reading Dr. Alibai and Dr. Gordon's paper, where they schematize the two religious traditions, justice, of course, is understood as the one of the principles that scores are just 1+ out of possible 4, I think it was, from the Islamic side. And of course, I was really taken aback by that. But I understand exactly what you were getting at in the paper, and yet theologically, the idea that justice should just be 1+ out of possible 4 in the Islamic tradition is very surprising indeed. So.
The last couple of questions Amar's included in the remarks sort of go to this interesting issue. You made the comments about adl as opposed to ma'ruf and sort of local versus global concepts, and you talked about this sort of seamless world global community. Forgive me for sounding a bit arrogant, but that's asking a lot of people. And it is our natural tendency to build constructed, arguably arbitrary constructs. It's just our nature. Big mouth, long teeth, bad news. Red berry tastes sweet, that's good for me. I mean, it's we've got this long history of categorization and Amar's question about inclusion and exclusion, our concepts of appropriateness. I'm a policy guy, and I'm always more interested in here's the normative goal, here's where we are. We didn't get there, why not? That's where my grant funding, of course, comes from. So that's what I'm interested in. That's the best category of all, I suppose. Seriously, how do you just sort of move that along when you've got 1.2 billion of your closest friends that you got to deal with this, if you will, to sort of put it glibly?
I'm not sure what the question is. The topic I'm sure of, but I'm not sure what your specific question is.
Just sort of, if you could expand a little bit more about, that's great that we talk about these goals. Here we are, and just if you could just sort of touch on where do you sort of. I doubt we could do this in the context of a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan, but hey, the Chinese tried it, why not? I mean,
the Chinese tried it not through autonomy and liberalism. They did it through hierarchical structures.
I think that one has to think globally but act locally, as the old bumper sticker says. But I still support that. And I see such exciting things happening in places in the world where Muslims have not lived before, at least not in significant densities. Many parts of Canada and the United States and Latin America as well. A lot of people don't even think about urban South America and in Mexico City and places like that. And I think that these are wonderful, almost experiments in some ways of testing in a way what one can do as a community of believers living, let us say, as a minority in larger communities. But there still is this sense of sub-communities, of ummas, you might say, as in Canada and parts of the United States and Mexico and beyond, where people see themselves as part of the global ummah. But they are living and behaving locally. But they have a global commitment, loyalty, love, valuation, rejoicing, gratitude, and worry. All of these things go with it. And so I'm speaking generally to be sure, but I mean, cases are something we can talk about. I don't mean that we have to do it together right now, but in seminars where there are students in our communities, in our synagogues and mosques and churches, and that's happening too in places where people are beginning to wonder. And sometimes the sense of community that Muslims share is definitely appreciated through actions, not only of the members of the community, but of people outside. Let us say when we've had a very sad, tragic incident here and there of vandalism or burning or explosion in a mosque or something, there have been, not in every case, but cases where Jews and Christians have come forth and stood beside the people and appreciated their community as Muslims, but also their being in the larger community of pluralism. And I won't go on, but I mean, these are some of the categories I'm thinking of, but they're not just categories, I don't think. I think they're realities too.
Thank you. Bert Broekhaert, Leuven, Belgium. Just a small remark regarding contemporary bioethics. Well, we all agreed, or we all knew that Islam is a complex topic and issue, but I just want to point out that contemporary Western bioethics is too, and I know very well that principalism is a big thing in the United States, but it is not a big thing in most European countries. And so even in the West, a lot of traditions which has nothing to do with principalism, but which do play an important role in Western thought at this moment.
You're absolutely right. For example, the European concept of solidarity, which you don't find here. So you're right. When I was talking about it, it was based on essentially my bifocal lens. One is US and the other is Pakistan. But you're right.
But for instance, ethics of care is something which is extremely important nowadays.
Exactly.
Stefan and Brande, also KU Leuven, Belgium. I have a question to Professor Denny. You mentioned the Islam Without Borders. I did not read the article by Professor Noor, but I did read the analysis by Olivier Roy on globalized Islam, from which I've learned that there are some problems associated to this creation of a virtual ummah, a globalized ummah, which he analyzes through the virtual ummah that is being created through the internet, use of internet. Which he describes as being individualistic. Everyone can speak for Islam and having authority, uprooted, transgressing madhab boundaries, and in a way fundamentalistic, in the way that it's taking care only of Quran and Hadith, skipping every kind of historical, philosophical, or juridical discussion, coming just as skipping this and coming to a conclusion. What's your perception of this analysis?
Yeah, I think that there are some factors shared with Wikipedia and with the blogoria and things like that throughout the world. That and if you go, for example, to Al-Fatiha, do you ever go to that? The Queer Jihad network?
No, I've heard about it.
It's quite remarkable. That people can do the most transgressive things through the internet. And so I mean, I think here's another example of this new world of communication, this virtual world that we all inhabit, whether we want to or not, whether we know we do or not. And I wouldn't reduce some of the aspirations for global Muslim community values and ideas to just the contemporary technologically related things, because if I'm understanding you, because the notion of Muslim community is not a new thing. That has been around for a long time, and it has tremendous impetus, but it has many forms of expression and reality as well, and that gets very complicated, but it's also quite wonderful.
I've noticed the impact on bioethics also by analyzing Sunni e-fatwas given out on various websites, from askimam.com until the Imana website.
Or Dial a Fatwa.
Yes.
Yeah.
They mention the basics and they come to a conclusion.
Right.
So it relates to bioethics, and that's why
It does.
I wanted
It does
to
indeed,
mention
yes.
this.
And it can be very it can be very difficult and problematic and misleading.
It just, if I understood you correctly, I don't know what the virtual Ummah is. For me to become a physician so that people would recognize me as a physician who they could go to, I had to go through medical school and a residency program. So my issue is to be able to speak authoritatively about Islam and what it involves. Surely there has to have been some kind of education and training. And so the issue is that, you know, there has to be some qualifications. They have, and I'm not suggesting where the boundaries should be, but if you belong to a particular religion, if you belong to a particular club, there are certain rules. Now, where you're going to set the boundaries, I'm not getting into that. I wouldn't. But so this issue of a virtual kind of an ummah, you can get on and say, okay, this is what Islam is, or this is what Islam is. It's like somebody would say, okay, well, I've read a little bit. This is, you have appendicitis, come on in and I'll operate and take it out. So it's...
I think we'll take one final question from Dr. Shabir Alibai.
Thank you. I guess Shabir Alibai from Toronto. I'm just going to move the discussion to a very different area, and I apologize if it's mundane or mechanistic. And it's addressed to you, John, and that is what happens next. In terms of the options, because you mentioned one of the issues that could be discussed in this plenary session would be what happens to the presentations and papers from this meeting. And the other part of my question in terms of what happens next is there a plan for Part B? For another one of these ethics conferences in a couple of years to sort of bring back people, or to sort of take the agenda forward and bring in areas that haven't been covered in this meeting, or to bring new developments, that sort of thing. Those are the two issues. And I'll express one potential concern with going forward with sharing some of the information presented at the meeting. Applies not to my papers in terms of mine are not empiric, but some of the empiric studies that were presented here, and some of the authors are still here. I wonder if publishing them in some format, such as a book or conference proceedings, may impact on their ability to also then be shared through a peer review mechanism, whether indexed in Medline or not. And so I just raise that as a possibility for some of the people who may not want to raise that themselves.
I'm sorry, impact negatively. You mean
in terms of the ability to be able to publish them later elsewhere.
Somewhere else, right?
Right, because exactly. The cat's out of the bag type of thing, and good quality journals that already don't publish a lot of Islamic bioethics empiric research because there isn't that much out there, they would be less likely to look on these favorably if they've already been leaked. And I just raise that as a possibility.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, it's the very important points. I think one of the reasons probably why our conversation didn't naturally turn in that direction is that we're missing many of the people who contributed so much to this conference, and so it becomes very difficult to talk about that and on their behalf in one sense. And so let me simply outline some of the ideas we have already. And most importantly, encourage you to keep in contact not only with us by email afterwards, but also to fill out the feedback forms precisely with the suggestions that we can practically use to move forward, because in some ways I'm also a policy person. I'm interested in getting to point B. The initial concept was to publish some of the papers as a special edition of a journal. So in other words, take a whole journal up for some of these papers, with the idea that journal publication can be much quicker, and then also to have a volume of conference proceedings. But you're precisely right in one of the difficulties. I mean, the desire of the very benefit of this conference is this interdisciplinary nature, and yet one has to be very sensitive to the fact that every publication, every line in the CV, in particular sorts of journals, really makes a difference, especially for people who are still building their career. So certainly I and the other people on the steering committee are very sensitive to that and would appreciate particular suggestions you have, and I'm very grateful to Hassan and to the people who've talked about this already in terms of where we can place this. We're trying to be very strategic about that. As to reincarnation of this conference, I have to say once again as a closing remark, in some ways this really is part B. And it's part C that we're looking forward to. In that part A was in Haifa back in 2001 with the Conference on Islamic Law and Islamic medical law and medical ethics. Do I have that right, Vardit? At that conference, there's already a journal that came out, Medicine and Law, devoted to conference papers. So we would very much like to go forward, and there are a number of possibilities that have been tossed about. One is the idea that the location matters, and if you look at what went on in Haifa and what went on here, there is very much a local flavoring to each of these conferences. I think that's extremely positive. You talked about reaching out and having representatives of the Muslim world. Well, of course, we have, in many ways, North America is the Muslim world. We certainly have representatives of the Muslim world, North American, here. And that's been a tremendous asset to this conference. So should it therefore move to, I'm personally in favor of Kuala Lumpur, but Australia, we have an invitation from Queensland.
Queensland, yes.
And Europe has also been bandied about as a possibility. So these are various possibilities. So physically moving the conference to a different place because of that, and also whether the topic should remain so open and eclectic. Is that a positive thing, or is that rather a negative? Would there be a desire to move then toward a more focused discussion of, say, a cluster of particular ethical issues? I have to say one of the reasons that I invited Fred to respond is because I'm always interested in opening up. And it's very hard for me to imagine a discussion of bioethics and Islam without also discussing ecology, human rights, ethics of war, because they are so interrelated. But these are the various issues, at least that are on the table. And I encourage you all to keep in contact, and I thank you very much for coming. I would like to close by thanking one person who's been absolutely instrumental in producing this conference for us, and that's Jeff Jenkins, our techno guru. So thank you. Thank you all.
I think I would like to thank John on behalf of all of us for putting up such a wonderful conference.